Brazil has already gone to war against its own people, and almost no one talks about it. Today, we're going to delve deeper into this incredible story. My name is Richard D'Souza, and we'll be exploring part one of the forgotten history of the Canudos War. In the late 19th century, thousands of men, women, and children were hunted, surrounded, and killed within their own country, not by a foreign enemy, but by the Brazilian government itself. All of this unfolded in the middle of famine, extreme poverty, religious devotion, and a crisis that seemed to have no end. At the center of it all was a man seen by many as a saint and by others as a dangerous threat, Antônio Conselheiro. But to understand how this story began, we need to go back to a moment when Brazil stopped being an empire and stepped into one of the most chaotic and unstable periods in its history. The year is 1890, and Brazil is facing a period of deep instability. Just 1 year earlier, after decades of political tension, economic decline, and internal pressure, the empire had collapsed. The fall of the monarchy came shortly after the abolition of slavery in 1888, a decision that directly affected the powerful agrarian elites who had long supported the imperial system. Without their backing, the empire could no longer stand, and military forces took control, establishing a republic. However, what appeared to be a step toward progress quickly turned into a system that excluded most of the population from any real participation. With more than 90% of Brazilians unable to read or write, the idea of democracy existed more in theory than in reality. The majority of the population could not vote, did not participate in political decisions, and often did not even understand the changes happening around them. Power remained concentrated in the hands of a small group, while millions struggled daily just to survive. As the new government attempted to organize itself, the country was already sinking into a severe economic crisis, particularly in regions such as Bahia. This state had been losing economic importance for decades, and now the situation became even more critical. Large landowners controlled vast areas of land, preventing small farmers from developing their own livelihoods and making it nearly impossible for poor communities to sustain themselves. Without access to land, stable work, or government support, thousands of people began wandering across the backlands in search of survival. These were men and women with no clear destination, living on the margins of society and facing constant hunger, drought, and abandonment. The situation worsened further due to the failure of local elites to attract European immigrants and the widespread prejudice against the Sertão population, which was often excluded from the few opportunities that existed. The economic policies introduced by the new republic proved to be disastrous and accelerated the country's decline. Inflation rose sharply, making basic goods increasingly unaffordable for the population. Within a few years, prices surged dramatically, pushing even more people into extreme poverty. In the Northeast, the effects were especially devastating as the traditional sugar-based economy collapsed and was replaced by coffee production, which became the dominant force in Brazilian exports. While some regions of the country experienced growth, others were left behind. Bahia's participation in the national economy dropped significantly, intensifying inequality and deepening the crisis. The gap between regions widened, and the sense of abandonment grew stronger among those living in the most affected areas. If life was already difficult in urban centers, in the backlands it was even more severe. Constant droughts, isolation, and a lack of resources made survival a daily struggle. In certain periods, thousands of people died due to hunger and lack of water, while many others were forced to migrate in search of better conditions. It was within this environment of despair, suffering, and neglect that a movement began to emerge, one that would eventually transform the reality of the region and draw the attention of the entire country. Antonio Vicente Mendes Maciel was born in 1830 in the interior of Ceará, and unlike most people of his time, had access to formal education. However, after the death of his parents, he was unable to maintain his family's business and soon found himself following the same path as many others, becoming a wanderer across the backlands. For years, he survived by taking on small jobs, teaching, performing manual labor, and working as a cattle herder while traveling through remote and often forgotten regions. Over time, his strong religious beliefs led him toward a different role. He became a traveling spiritual leader, offering guidance and support to communities that were often abandoned by both the state and the official church. This role would become central to his growing influence. In many interior regions, the lack of priests meant that religious figures known as beatos played a crucial role in maintaining spiritual life. Antonio quickly gained recognition within these communities, attracting followers wherever he went. His influence grew steadily, and among the many names he was given, one stood out and would become part of history: Antônio Conselheiro. His followers were, for the most part, individuals who had been left behind by society: former slaves, poor workers, landless peasants, persecuted individuals, and people with nowhere else to go. For them, Antonio represented something rare: hope, purpose, and a sense of belonging. What began as a religious movement gradually expanded into something much larger, bringing together those who had been marginalized and giving them a new identity. As his influence expanded, so did the opposition against him. To elites and authorities, Antônio Conselheiro was no longer just a religious figure. He was seen as a dangerous leader, capable of mobilizing large groups and challenging the established order. He was persecuted, falsely accused, arrested, and physically assaulted, yet none of these actions managed to stop the growth of his movement. With the establishment of the Republic, new laws began to generate strong reactions among the population, including the requirement of civil marriage and the increase of taxes. For many people living in the backlands, these changes were seen as a new form of oppression. In a decisive act, his followers burned tax signs in a village, openly defying government authority. From that moment on, there was no turning back. The government responded by sending a police force to capture Antônio Conselheiro, believing it would be an easy mission against an unorganized group. However, the reality was very different. The soldiers were caught in an ambush and faced a group that, despite being poorly armed, had deep knowledge of the terrain and strong determination to resist. The confrontation was intense and resulted in a disorganized retreat of the government forces. After this event, Antonio and his followers made a decisive move and settled in a remote area of Bahia's backlands. There, they built a community that represented a new way of life based on faith, collective work, and mutual support. For its inhabitants, this place was sacred, and they named it Belo Monte. However, the rest of the country would come to know it by another name, one that would become historic: Canudos. What began as a religious movement was about to transform into one of the most intense conflicts in Brazilian history. Canudos continued to grow, the government prepared its response, and the entire country began to turn its attention toward the backlands, because what would come next would be larger, far more violent, and impossible to ignore. If you want to discover the most incredible, forgotten, and surprising stories about Brazil, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button to support the content, and don't miss what's coming next, because there's so much history you've never heard before.